What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the ARC podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Zachary, and this is the Athletes Resilience Center podcast where we talk all things mental performance in sports. We have an awesome episode for you this week. We sat down with Gabriel Rocha, mental performance coach, cognitive performance specialist for the United States Air Force, and competitive bodybuilder. And this conversation goes deep into what it actually means to perform when the stakes are high. Gabriel's journey starts during high school sports, where an injury his junior year of football forced him to shift his mindset. And after reading the book Relentless by Tim Grover, everything changed. He went from fighting for a starting spot to becoming a team captain, earning all conference honors, and discovering the power of the mental game. From there, he pursued sports psychology, earned his master's degree, and ended up working with the military, helping student pilots and fighter pilots sharpen their focus, regulate under pressure, and perform in environments where mistakes aren't just losses, they're life or death. We talk about the similarities between elite athletes and fighter pilots, why high performers don't need perfect conditions, identity versus the roles we play, the danger of outcome obsession, how to build resilience that isn't tied to results, and what bodybuilding has taught him about discipline, delayed gratification, and presence. This episode blends sport, military performance, identity, and resilience in a way that I think you guys are really going to like. This was an awesome episode, and I hope you guys enjoy. Gabriel, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I appreciate this. We were chatting over social media DMs, which is awesome. It was really cool that one of our videos reached you. You were able to swipe up and we kind of connected, which was so cool. But I appreciate you taking the time to come on. How are we doing tonight, man?
Doing fantastic, man. And honestly, seeing the content that you guys are putting out, it's some really good stuff. So I know that was our first time actually having an interaction when I did swipe up on one of your videos, but I just wanted to give you guys your credit where it's due. And, you know, me being in the mental performance space, seeing other people doing good work, it's like I want to highlight that and make sure they're getting their credit. So I'm really honored that you guys are having me on the podcast tonight.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. And likewise, like I said to you, I love your content, man, and it's awesome. You're sharing your education and your knowledge because, we talked off camera. I think it's an undertouched area, truthfully, mental performance in sports. So, people like yourself who are expressing that and showing their education online, I really am appreciative for that. So thanks for that. But we'll start this podcast just like we do every other podcast. I'm going to throw the ball back in your court. We'll let you introduce yourself and kind of take us through your journey on how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. So, my name is Gabriel Rocha. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I grew up playing tons of sports. So, football, basketball, baseball, raced motocross for a little bit, and then currently into bodybuilding. I found the world of sports psychology actually my junior year of high school. So, I remember I was in my junior year and I didn't really know what I wanted to do yet. And I took a psychology course, just normal psych. And while I was in that course, I was like, this is pretty cool. Like I could see myself going into like clinical psychology. And so initially I wanted to go into clinical psych, and my junior year, I ended up getting injured during the football season in our playoff game, and so that whole offseason basically was now just rehabbing my ankle that had gotten basically just rolled over and crushed. So while I was in early on in that rehab process, I actually read Tim Grover's book Relentless, which is Tim Grover. If you guys don't know him, he was Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Dwayne Wade's sports psychologist. And when I read that book, I read it in like a day and a half, and just reading that one book, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so basically from that moment on, I started seeing how sports psychology could help me. I tried to use as much of that book as possible going into my senior year, and it completely changed how I was able to approach the game of football from my junior year to my senior year. I performed way better my senior year. I went from junior year, like fighting for a starting spot, to senior year team captain. I'd put on 40 pounds. I was playing offensive line, ended up getting all league, all conference, all area honors. So I was like, okay, well, if I can make this mental shift, I want to help other people make this mental shift as well. So I ended up going to school, Cal State Long Beach, got my undergrad done there, then went over to Cal Baptist University, got my master's done. And when I was in the process of getting my master's, I went into it with the thought of wanting to work with professional athletes, Olympic athletes. But unfortunately, I got my master's in 2020. And we all know what happened to the world of sports
Hmm.
back in 2020 with everything being shut down. And so when I graduated, there weren't really many open jobs hiring in the mental performance field because no one was really playing or they were so restricted. And so I ended up finding mental performance within the military sector and military contracting. So I actually got my first job out of grad school as a master resilience trainer in Fort Polk, Louisiana. So I was
Yeah.
contracting for the Army, was there for about a year. And then from there, I ended up transferring over to an Air Force contract. And from there, my title is cognitive performance specialist. I was in Columbus, Mississippi for about a year and a half working with Air Force student pilots, helping them sharpen up the mental game as they're in the process of earning their wings to become rated Air Force pilots. And then after about a year and a half there, I transitioned over to San Antonio. So I currently work at Randolph Air Force Base, which still on the same contract, still with the same company, but now the mission is working with instructor pilots, fighter pilots primarily.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And then I know you have your business as well, working with athletes in mental performance, which is
Mhm.
awesome. And obviously we're going to dive into that too. But I want to take it back to your high school days that you brought up, because I think a lot of people that we've had on this podcast who are in the mental performance space did start from an injury or something like that,
Mhm.
like facing some sort of adversity and having to be resilient through it, which is really cool to kind of see that overlap between people. Now, for you specifically, right, like you said, you got injured junior year, kind of fighting for a spot, you get injured, and you're like, man, obviously I'm sure you're down in the dumps pretty bad about that. I'd love you to go into kind of what the Tim Grover book Relentless meant to you, and what were the specific changes that you made from junior year to senior year, because like you said, you read the book front to back in a day and a half and it really stuck with you. Like, what were some of those actionable items that you took almost instantly after you read the book that transformed you from, junior year fighting for a starting job, senior year captain, all league, all conference?
I think it kind of starts with my childhood just being ultra competitive in everything. And part of that is having an older brother that's 6 years older than me that used to just beat me in everything.
Right, right.
But I always knew that there was this like competitive side of me that I had never fully unlocked. And so when Tim Grover's talking about like being a cleaner and what that really means, because he's got like cleaner, closer, etc., right? I really resonated with what being a cleaner meant. And I knew that I had the potential to live up to like the daily actionables of what a cleaner would, but I hadn't been living up to them. And so in that process, it was like a mirror that allowed me to see, like, hey, you're not living up to your full potential. And that book essentially called it out. And so from there, I was just like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go into this off season. I'm going to rehab my ankle as quickly as possible. And then I'm just going to try to become as good as I can at honing my craft. Part of that was also wanting to win a CIF ring so
Hmm.
badly when the playoffs, because I knew it was probably going to be my last year of football. I was like, I'm 200 well, at the time when I read the book, I was like 185 pounds. And I was just like, I'm not going to go play offensive line in any college, right? Nobody wants a 185-pound lineman. So I was like, well, you might as well go all in into this senior year. And so I distinctly remember that off season, like literally every single night, like thinking about winning CIF. Every single morning, first thing, thinking about winning CIF. Like nothing else mattered. And so I knew that like winning was the ultimate goal. And I was one of the few seniors that we had on the team. I think we only had like 8 seniors on the team. The rest of the guys were all juniors and sophomores. So I was like, if I want to win, I need to step up and be a leader, but I can't be a leader if I'm not actually living it out myself. And so day to day, like I was just like, all right, cool. I've got to wake up early. I've got to go do the workouts. I've got to go do the hill sprints on my own. I've got to go drink the mass gainer shakes. I've got to go hit
Yeah.
the gym twice a day. And it was my entire life just became enveloped in football. And like I said, during that off season, I put on about 40 pounds. I came back
Yeah.
at around like 225 my senior year, and I had a really good year. So throughout the process between that off season, between junior year and senior year, I noticed that there was like this huge mental shift. And I was like, I've never felt so obsessed with some sort of goal in my life. And I was like, if I can unlock this, I know other people can unlock it. And that's what really resonated with me. So it's like I felt myself like becoming closer to that cleaner that Tim Grover talks about in his book. And I was like, that's something I identify with.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And like Tim Grover, obviously one of the best of all time. He's awesome. And they give a sneak peek of him too in the Last Dance documentary. I know
really popular over COVID, but I mean, that guy's awesome. And I've
Oh,
never read Relentless, but I think that's a book I definitely want to hop on. But it's funny how you talk about the junior to senior year flip because I had something similar. So my junior year, I had an umbilical hernia that
ooh,
I never really knew of until I was swinging a bat one day. One of my best friends was sitting right there, like giving me soft toss while I'm swinging a bat. Um, and I swung and I missed the ball. And as I like finished my swing, I like felt it felt like a pop in my
right.
belly, and I'm like that didn't feel right. And I looked down and it literally looked like a little ball like poking out of my stomach, and I was
Ooh,
like, it wasn't painful. You
right.
just kinda your body's just kinda stiffen up because it's like, "What the heck just
Yeah.
happened?" But I had the umbilical hernia and I got surgery, and I remember I didn't have that click to mental performance like you're talking about, where it's like, this book made me be like, "I want this," but the competitive side I really resonate with because going in from my junior year to senior year, I think I was a pitcher, and I gained, like, 8 miles an hour on the mound, like,
Whew,
something like that, something crazy, and
that's huge.
it was all just like what you talked about, process oriented. Every day was like, listen, one, and obviously the umbilical hernia is something that happens at birth, and it's not really something that you're gonna prevent to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily that the injury was like you did anything wrong, but it was like, when you come back from this, you should use this as an opportunity to become a completely different person, go a completely different pitcher. So I really resonate with that thought process, and I love you kind of sharing that and going into that because that's really cool.
Yeah, it was a very transformative moment for me, and I think that seeing that shift has definitely carried over into today, being a competitive bodybuilder myself and knowing
Yeah.
that, like, there's always that gear that you didn't know you had. If you can tap into it and use it appropriately, that's where you can really win the margins.
Yeah, yeah. No, and in any sport, right? It's like that margin that's so small, but if you can capitalize that every single day, right? If you can push yourself just a little bit harder every single day, like at the end of the year, you're gonna look back and be like, wow, I'm really proud of the work that I put in. So no, I really appreciate that. But getting into bodybuilding, right? So
Mm.
you talked about football. Your senior year when you had football and you had success, was there any thought in your head of kind of like, maybe I do want to see this through and see if I can go to college and play this at the collegiate level? Because you said like you were 180 pounds your junior year, came back.
Mhm.
I guess if you gained 40 pounds, 220. So now you're getting closer to that collegiate offensive line build. Was that something that you wanted to pursue, or was that never a thought in your mind?
Not really in terms of offensive line, so it's pretty funny. So I played center and I also played kicker.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
I was a place kicker wearing lineman cleats and
Yeah.
wearing knee braces, and I was I was pretty decent at it. Like, I was reliably hitting field goals within 40 yards, 45
Yeah.
yards. And so for me, it was more so, can I still get some good kicking film out and then try to walk on somewhere or try to get
Right.
picked up and get a scholarship as a kicker?
Okay.
Things did not really pan out, and I would have liked to, but it wasn't kinda like the end all be all because I knew I wanted to go for sports psych more than anything else.
Right. So a lot of guests that we have on that kind of use their whole life playing sports,
Mhm,
myself included, everyone that we've had on, obviously, have kind of dove into their respective sports. You football, and like you said, growing up playing a multitude of sports. When you were done playing football and done playing, let's say, high school sports or competitive sports, what did that do for you and your own identity
mhm.
as you like walked away from those things? Because some people really struggle with that, and
Yeah.
some people come to terms with it and are kind of like, this was for the best. Like, how did you process that? What did that look like for you?
There was some upside to it, and there was definitely some downside to it. So, the downside is that we got to the CIF championship game, and we got our teeth kicked in. Like, the team that we ended up having to face that year, my senior year, they were the defending champs, and the year that they won it before, their whole class was like juniors and sophomores. So
Mm,
they're coming back as seniors. They ran us off the field. I think they rushed for like over 300 yards on us. So there was a part of me that leaving football, I was like, I don't want to go into another sport where I have to rely on other people because I knew how much I had put into that off season for myself specifically. It was a bit of the upside was okay, going into something different where it's just like an individual based sport. I saw that as a challenge where, everything relies on me. But then the downside of it was one, I truly loved playing football. Like, there was nothing that really came close to it at that time that I had experienced. And so I was losing the sense of community after season had ended. And then also watching the juniors get ready for their senior year while I'm still like in school. Cause, their off season is now January through the summer. And so it's like the rest of my senior year, I'm hanging out with my senior friends who were about to graduate, but I'm also seeing my junior friends like, oh, hey, we're gonna go hit the gym together. And I'm just like, I miss that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was some of the downside, but I was really looking forward to getting into something that was much more individual based, where I just felt like I could just rely on myself.
Yeah. No, I completely get that. And I think, like you said, when you put in so much work, time, and effort into a sport,
Uh,
like you said, you almost have a piece of knowing that you did give it all you could, right? Like you said, going junior year to senior year, making those jumps, it's like you can go back, you could tell yourself, you could tell, your kids in the future, you can communicate with anyone, right? That's your story, and you can put your head on the pillow at night knowing that you gave it everything you got, right? You gave it 110%. And, you got to respect that and you got to be able to move on from that, which is great. But now moving into your love for bodybuilding.
mhm,
So once football is done for you, when are you getting into bodybuilding? Was it like while you were playing football, you're in it? Or is
mhm.
it once you're done football, bang, now I'm into bodybuilding? How did that look for you?
So I had been following bodybuilding kind of loosely my senior year after football had ended, but I didn't really look at it so much as like a sport that I wanted to engage in. Because at that point, it was just all about weightlifting. So it's like for football, obviously, you have like your squat, your bench, your deadlift, your power cleans. And so I finished up my senior year of football and I was more of a power lifter. And I remember I was
Okay.
training with one of my friends at the time who was my training partner, and my main goal was like just try to be as strong as possible. So it's like I had gotten into like the 1,000 pound club, which was really
Hmm.
cool for me. So what actually kind of flipped the switch was my senior year after football had ended. For our senior graduation trip, we were going to the Bahamas as a class, and there were like
Okay.
30 of us who were going on this senior grad trip. And so, like I said, I had just put on 40 pounds for football. And I was like, okay, well, now I need to get this weight off so I can look good in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And so that's where I started paying a lot more attention to bodybuilding and, okay, how can I manipulate all these different variables to then make my body look a certain way? Because I could eat all day long and get stronger, but I didn't know how to do it the other way, where it's like, hey, now we're just working on trying to lose as much fat as possible and gain as much muscle as possible. So that's where the love for bodybuilding started, was training with that friend during my senior year. And then going into my freshman year of college, I actually went to Santa Monica Community College first. And so my dad had a car shop that was a couple blocks away from Santa Monica College. And it was also like a few minutes drive from Gold's Gym in Venice. And so for those of your listeners who don't know, Gold's Gym in Venice is like the bodybuilding hub of the world. Like that's where Arnold Schwarzenegger trained. That's where tons of pro bodybuilders used to train. And so this is 2015, and there's tons of pro bodybuilders at Gold's Gym in Venice. And I'd been going to gym. It was like 24-hour fitness. And one day I'm finishing up class and my dad calls me. And so I used to park my car at his shop and then ride my skateboard up to campus so I didn't have to pay for parking. And so he calls me and he's just like, hey, I've got someone here at the shop. I told him you like this bodybuilding stuff. And he used to be a bodybuilder. So he said he wants to meet you. And I was like, all right, cool. Like I just finished up class. I'll be down at the shop in like 10 minutes. So I get there and there's an older pro bodybuilder who used to be like one of the legends back in like the 70s. His name is Rick Valente. And so I walk in there and Rick's just like, hey, Gabe, like your dad tells me you're into bodybuilding. Have you ever been to Gold's before? And I was like, no, like I've never made my way over there. I know it's there, but truthfully, I was just a bit intimidated because I didn't feel
Yeah.
like a bodybuilder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was just like, all right, well, how about this? Like you come on down. I'll let the owner of the gym know that you're going to be coming down, and we'll get you a free day pass and you can go check it out. So I was like, all right, sure. So I go check it out and I walk in there and I immediately fell in love with the place. Now, where the story gets a little tricky is that I walked in there, I fell in love with the place. After a couple of weeks, that's when the intimidation kind of started setting in. And I was like,
Hmm.
I don't know if I actually belong here. Like I'm so much smaller than all of these pro bodybuilders. And there was a moment that really stuck out to me that I still remember to this day. So I was doing pull-ups and there's a current pro bodybuilder. His name is Sergio Oliva Jr. His dad actually won the Mr. Olympia back in
Okay.
1960 something, Sergio
Yeah.
Oliva Sr. So his dad's a legend in the sport. And I'm doing pull-ups and I'm struggling. And out of nowhere, like someone comes up and they like lift my legs and they spot me for a few more reps. And I'd never talked to him before. I get down from the pull-ups and he's just like, hey man, like good stuff. Like keep it up. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, I do belong here. Like people, they just respect work ethic here. They don't care how big you are or how small you are. And so that was kind of like the moment where I was like, okay, I'm going all in on bodybuilding now.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love that. And Gold's Gym too in Venice. I mean, that's the mecca, right? That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So your experience there, right? So with bodybuilding then, like that was the start. Then where has that taken you, right? Like where has bodybuilding now guided you throughout this kind of journey of yours?
So like I said, that was 2015. We're here 10 years later. I've competed a few times now. I love the sport. I live the sport. Bodybuilding has been just an amazing journey for me so far. And so it kind of started out as just like, hey, I just want to control how I look. But over the years, as you start to learn more about it and really realize the benefits that you can get from bodybuilding, I started to learn that bodybuilding is a lot more about the discipline, about doing the hard stuff on the days you don't want to do, and how bodybuilding can help shape you into the person that you want to become. Just
Hmm.
like any given sport, right? Like you can take the
Yeah.
hard stuff from any sport, but for me, bodybuilding happened to be the thing. And so I love the control aspect of it where I can manipulate food, I can manipulate the amount of cardio I'm doing, I can manipulate the training, all of that stuff, and create this formula that hopefully turns into this symphony that creates a physique that you end up liking. And so that's where bodybuilding has brought me to today.
Yeah, so you brought up the mental components and
Mhm.
a lot of the performance things that you talked about with the discipline and the structure and manipulating things in order to gain an advantage in whichever way you want, whether
Mhm.
it's gaining muscle, losing weight, whatever it is, right? So I'd love you to kind of go into how you think bodybuilding helps you as a mental performance coach, right? Because obviously you have to live a certain way in order to
Right.
take bodybuilding very seriously. So I'd love to hear from your perspective from, the mental side of things. How does that help you be the best mental performance coach that you can be both with the military and then with athletes?
From an aesthetic standpoint, I do think that there's some level of me looking a certain way that almost creates a degree of credibility, especially working in the military and working with elite performers within the military, and instructor pilots, fighter pilots, student pilots. When I walk into the room and I look a certain way, I've noticed that they tend to look at me a little bit differently because they're like, oh, there's almost like this level of respect where, oh, you must have some form of discipline to look that way. And so when you're talking about mental performance stuff, like you've obviously created the discipline, you've done hard things, right? You've done it for years at a time. And so I think that it creates a degree of credibility in looking a certain way, right? I know some people don't like to hear that, but it's like,
No, I
being
agree.
at a
I
gym
agree.
and wanting to hire a trainer, it's like you want to hire a trainer that looks a certain way because you know they've lived the life in some
Yeah.
degree, right?
Yeah. Right.
Now, from a mental standpoint, what I think bodybuilding has helped me with is when I look at the training and the way that I used to train when I started bodybuilding, I always thought I was training really hard. And then you train with someone who actually trains hard, and you're like, that's hard training.
Yeah.
And then you
Right.
train with someone who trains even harder than that, and you're like, oh, there is another, like, you start to recognize that there are levels of intensity. And
Hmm.
then you start to learn, okay, what are the things that I can tap into that are going to allow me to perform at that level of intensity with that level of focus, right? I also think it helps me create skills within cognitive performance with things like attention. So it's like if I'm going in for a big set of heavy deadlifts or a heavy set of hack squats, my attention has to be fully immersed in the task that I am doing.
Right.
Because if my mind starts to switch off to work stress or stress that might be at home or financial, whatever, you end up losing 1 or 2 reps, right? Or even worse, like you might end up injuring yourself because you have some sort of a miscue.
Right.
And so it
Right.
teaches you how to be very, very present in a sport where essentially the main skill of the sport is delayed gratification, right? So it's like the diet that you're doing right now, you're doing it so you'll look good in several months. The training that you're doing right now so that you can build the muscle in several months and look a certain way. Very rarely do you get any sort of immediate effect from bodybuilding unless you're just talking about a pump, which that goes away like 20 minutes after you leave the gym.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you are consistently thinking about the future and every decision that you are making is centered around what you're going to get in the future, I think we as bodybuilders tend to lose track of staying present in the moment, especially when we're doing things that suck. So it's like when I'm waking up in the morning and I'm doing my 30 or 45 minutes of cardio fasted, I'm thinking about the cardio because it's going to make me leaner in the future. But then that takes away from me actually being present in the moment. And so I think that bodybuilding has taught me how to be a lot more present. It's taught me how to be a lot more objective because it's very easy to be very subjective on days when I might feel a certain way, right? And when we talk about emotions, emotions tend to be like a lens. Like you see, I'm wearing my blue light glasses right now. It's like, this is a lens. Emotions are a certain way. So it's like, if I'm feeling an emotion of disappointment and then I go look at my physique in the mirror, that might change the way that I'm looking at myself versus if I'm feeling the emotion of happiness or joy and then I go look in the mirror, or gratitude. And so being able to understand, hey, how do my emotions influence my perspective about the world, but then also how I'm approaching any given task?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, to your point about like when you walk in a room and you look a certain way, right? And especially looking at it from your coaching lens of bodybuilding, right? Like, I think there is a certain level of authority and certain level of understanding where it's like, I have been where you guys are or have been, right? Or we're currently going through the same thing, I'm sure, in certain scenarios, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I have a baseball background, and I always think about this. The best coaches don't necessarily have to be the best athletes when they played, but they have to have a good understanding of it, right? They have to have gone through it in some capacity or some sense. Like, because whether you're a coach or you're a current athlete, there is that level of grind, or at least knowing what the grind looks like. So even just the way that you look and the way that you approach it and go about it, it's like, I'm going through it as well. Like, there's a level of understanding there, which I think adds value to the relationships that you're building and the people that you're helping.
Absolutely. And I see that with some of my own bodybuilding mental performance clients as well, where they'll actually come to me and, early on in one of our first few sessions, there's almost like this sigh of relief because they'll tell me, like, hey, I've been working with like an actual therapist or like an actual psychologist or someone, and they don't understand bodybuilding, which, as the job of a therapist, like, you're probably not going to be well versed in bodybuilding. And so having someone who has a background in bodybuilding but also mental performance, I can marry the two because I have that perspective where their therapist might say, oh, well, if bodybuilding's feeling really difficult, like, why don't you just, if dieting's really hard, why don't you just eat a little bit more food, or like change the things that you're doing, or not train so hard on these given days? And those athletes being high performers, they're not looking for that answer from their therapist. That's where they come to me, the mental performance coach, and say, hey, how can I still perform at a high level despite the fact that I'm feeling this way? And then that's where we start coming up with the different types of mental models, the mental frameworks, the systems, the tools, the strategies to still allow them to perform at a high level without almost coddling them away from the thing that they want to do most.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that too, because I actually had a similar experience with in college. Like, so I played baseball in college, and I get classified as a sports psychologist, and there was this I felt a lack of understanding of what I was trying to accomplish. And I think we had BYU's mental performance coach on here, and he works with a ton of athletes. And I asked him this question as well. And I think he is a sports psychologist. And when we were talking about this, I said, like, when I was on the mound, my level of intensity was at 100. I felt like, for me, when I felt like I was at my best, it felt like a boxing match. It felt like it was like me versus you, and it was like the killer instinct is at least what I was told what I told myself in my head. Obviously, like, you're pitching, it's not life or death, obviously, but that level of intensity is where I felt I thrived. And speaking with a sports psychologist, it was almost like, why don't you get more calm? And the thought was, well, the edge that I've always had has come from this level of intensity. And it's not like I was out of control crazy, but I just felt like there was a lack of understanding of what, he hadn't been there, I guess, in that situation, if that makes sense. So hearing you say that completely, makes sense and resonates with me. I get that.
Yeah. And trust me, I've worked with enough pitchers now to know that, like, you guys are a special breed, right?
Yeah. Right.
It's like you got to be a special kind of crazy to be a good pitcher because of, the ebbs and flows of the game. And it's that level of intensity. Like, if you find that works for you, like, that's great. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I love about, the mental performance world is that for you, having that intensity is going to lead to better performance. It's like you look at some of the more intense pictures, like, goodness, what's his name? God, I'm completely blanking right now.
No, you're good.
On some of like the pro pitchers in the league.
Scherzer, is that who you're thinking of? Max Scherzer?
Yes, Mad Max.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So it's like you look at Mad Max, like, he's up there cursing, he's up there making faces, like, that's when he's in his zone.
Right.
But then you look at someone like Roki, it's like,
Yeah.
you can't get a smile out of him.
Right.
He's completely zen.
Completely zen. Right.
And so it's understanding what your needs are. And then as a mental performance coach, like no one fix is going to be most beneficial for anyone. So it's like, okay, cool. How can we tap into the different things that are going to be really successful for that individual?
Yeah, it's very funny you brought up Scherzer because so the BYU coach that I referenced, he worked at Mizzou and he was there like right after Scherzer was. And Scherzer came back and he told a story about he was pitching in a start and they had told him previously, I don't know if he spoke with a sports psychologist on the team or not, but they had told him like make sure like you're calm, relaxed, and he's like okay, and he went out there and I think he got hit around for like five earned runs
Yep.
in like 2 innings, which obviously, as you know, Max Scherzer, not Max Scherzer.
Out.
And then I think they said he came out in like the second or the third or fourth inning, he came back out and he was like back to his normal. And I think he struck out the side or did something. And he's like, okay, now I know, like I'm back to what I need to do. And it's not trying to cultivate yourself in a way that fits a box for everyone else. It's about what works for you individually. And again, I played with pitchers that, like you said, no smile, or some guys smile, like they're just happy to be out there. And that's cool. Like that's their thing. And I've played with other guys and closers who's like, you don't really want to talk to them because they're nuts, and that's okay. But that's where they get their mental edge at a certain extent, right? So it's like everyone's very different, which I appreciate about the work that, you know, mental performance experts do, because it is cool to see you guys work in an individualistic way. And I'd love to hear from your sense. Now, I am not super well versed in the bodybuilding world, so please correct me if I'm wrong in any of the verbiage that I'm going to be using. But in this sense, right, like we just talked about, in any other sport, you have different personalities and different ways that you approach this. What are some of the different, I guess, personalities that you've seen, not naming any names or anything, obviously, but just different personalities of like guys that are super intense, maybe guys that are super calm? Because again, it's a very individualistic sport. So as far as competition, I know you're competing against others on stage, but as far as like in your training, like when I was at practice as a pitcher every day, I am competing against my teammates. But you're kind of in the gym alone at times, or you're in the gym with a buddy who isn't necessarily your competition, if that makes sense. Like how do you kind of decipher these different personalities that you've worked with, and like what have you seen mentally?
I think I've been very lucky to see like the entire gamut of personalities. So especially over the years that I've spent within bodybuilding, I've had personally different training partners who have different personality types. So back when I was going through my first prep for my first show back in 2019, my old training partner, Adam, we used to train together at like 4 a.m. And we would go hit legs at 4 a.m. at Gold's Gym right when they would open the doors. And for us two, it was this very, very quiet session where it's like we wouldn't even talk to each other for the first like 30 minutes of the session. But it's like we just have our headphones in, and the competition part there, because he wasn't actually competing at all as a bodybuilder. Like, he just loved to train hard. He was actually a hockey player, so he's his own special type of crazy.
Yeah.
He played D1 hockey over at Syracuse, and so he'd come back and he'd train in the off season with me. And the goal there was like, hey, let's see like who's more intense, like who can break first, essentially.
Yeah.
And so it's like we'd go hit our leg days together at 4 a.m. and it would just basically be okay, who's gonna puke first? Like, let's go try all this crazy stuff. But there was never a direct competition in terms of like weight moved or reps moved. It was just like, who can be intense? And then how can we bounce the intensity off of each other to make sure that the session keeps elevating? I've also had other training partners where it's like, you know, things are fun. Like, things are light, things are easy. There isn't necessarily the same intensity against each other, but the intensity in the set is there. And so it's like when you're in the middle of your set, like, I'm telling you things, right? Like, I'm in your ear. I'm making sure you're getting the most out of yourself. But as soon as the set's over, it's just like, damn, dude, like, good stuff. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of like some of the other personalities, I think the thing that people can do that will help them out the most is try to understand what they need and what allows them to perform at the best level day to day. And then once you kind of figure out what that baseline is how do we stay as close to that baseline as possible? And so if you're someone who you need to have that intensity, you walking in the gym, what does your pre-performance routine look like? Especially on days when you might be feeling a bit sluggish, or maybe you're not feeling the emotions that you would like to be feeling walking into the gym, or the intensity. It's like, okay, well, let's make sure we have some sort of pre-performance routine to get you up. For someone else who likes to be a bit more calm, and you're feeling a bit anxious that day, what's your pre-performance routine to kind of slow you down a little bit and bring down that physiology, get that parasympathetic effect? And so I think having the awareness of what your needs are and then having a plan in place to make sure that your needs are being met training session to training session, cardio session to cardio session, and just kind of carrying that baseline with you on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it's funny, we call it in baseball and as a pitcher, you have your pre-pitch routine, right? So it's the
Yeah.
same thing, kinda getting to the same state every single time that you take the ball, so I love that, that's awesome. And now you kind of referred to different training partners and kinda
Hmm.
different training styles. I'd also love to hear training with someone and a partner versus training alone, because I've gone in spurts where so when I was playing in college and outside of college, I worked out at a training facility with a lot of people that had the same goals as me. We're playing
Hmm.
college baseball, we're playing pro baseball. And that competitive environment, I felt like aided what I needed as a
Hmm.
competitive athlete because in my throwing training, I had my competition that I was competing against, whether it was a hitter or myself, versus when I'm in the gym, I'm also competing against other pitchers, other athletes in there who I will be also competing with and against out on the field. And then as I got away from athletics, I guess, playing athletics and got into coaching, what I found was there was a presence and almost an extra level of intensity now stepping away from the game, if that makes sense. Like now that I'm on the other side, I
Hmm.
almost enjoy a little bit more training alone, where I
Yeah.
wouldn't really look forward to training with someone else, I guess, if that makes sense. Like I
Right.
really enjoy going to the gym alone, kind of grinding and being intense on my own, playing my music
Mhm.
and just trying to lock in that way, I guess. I'd love to hear from your lens, like the differences you see with training with a partner and alone. I know it's case by case, obviously, but I'd kind of love to hear, I guess, your perspective on those two separate things.
Yeah. So for me personally, I think that when I have a good, consistent training partner you have a very good, clear understanding of like what the training needs to be.
Yeah.
And there doesn't really need to be too much talking about like what needs to happen. That to me is like you don't beat that. And so I've been very lucky over the last couple of years. Actually, my recent training partner, his name's Kyrie Cooper. He's a professional bodybuilder, classic physique bodybuilder. He looks insane. If I showed you pictures of him, you would be like, how is this physique even real? But he understands the mental game really well. And he actually knew about Tim Grover like from before I had even known him or anything like that. And so for about 2 years, we were consistently training together, 4:30 p.m. every single day. I'd get off work, he'd get off work, and we're at the gym. And we had developed this synergy where essentially like we wouldn't even need to talk. Like we would look at each other and we would have like certain hand signals to like let each other know like if we wanted more weight, it would be like just like an up and it would just be like, all right, we know to throw on one more plate. Or if we knew we were about to hit like the top set for that exercise, like an all out set of hack squats or an all out set of deadlifts, like we just look at each other and we go like this, like it's game time. Meanwhile, we both have our headphones on. I might be watching like a video on Instagram to get myself hyped up, or I might be listening to a specific song. But the cool part about it is that his physique is so high level, even just like in the world. So it's like I knew I was never going to catch his physique. Not anytime, probably not ever in my life. That's how good he is. But I knew that going into the gym and training with him, we weren't too far apart in terms of the weight and the reps that we would move on specific exercises. So we would gamify it because he's ultra competitive and he's very quiet about how competitive he is. Like he's very much like on the outside, he's always just like, hey man, how's it going? Super calm. But it's like once you start talking like the competitive side, like absolute killer,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I love.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
awesome.
knew how to bring that side out of him. And so when we'd be training together, especially like on leg days, because for bodybuilding, like leg day is the pinnacle. Like you almost like you get respect over how intensely you can make your leg day in the bodybuilding world, especially as like male open bodybuilding. So it's funny, we'd always start our leg day off with like seated adductor machine, which is the one
Yeah.
where you're just like closing your thighs
Yep.
together. And I was usually a lot stronger than him in that. And then from there, we would go to lying hamstring curls or like seated hamstring curls, some sort of hamstring movement. And if it was seated hamstring curls, I would usually beat him in that. If it's lying hamstring curls, he would usually beat me in that. And so we'd go back and forth. So on the days where we'd go adductors, seated hamstring curls, I would look at him and after those two movements and I'd be like, hey, it's 2-0. And he would look at me and he'd be like, oh yeah, that's the game you want to play today? MFer, you son of a you know what? And he's just like, all right, cool. And then it created like this competitive environment where, you know, he's going to blow me off the stage on any stage. But we're in the gym together and it's just like, okay, cool. We've got our logbooks out and we're trying to beat the logbook, but two, we're trying to level each other up. And so for me, like that competitive aspect where it never turns ugly against each other. To
Yeah.
me, that's the best environment to be in.
No, I love that. And I've definitely had training environments with both lifting for my sport and then playing my sport, being a throwing athlete, where you are in environments similar to that. And that's where you get the best out of people, right? Again, if you're in a sport that is competitive, then that's what you want to do, right? That's ultimately what you want to continue to cultivate and the environment that you want to continually practice in and be in. So, no, I love that. That's awesome. But you brought up a key piece. You brought up your logbooks. Now, I know that might not necessarily just be like the mental side, because obviously it's more about tracking your progress and your weights and the reps and sets that you're doing. But I'd love to hear you go into kind of the importance of a logbook from the bodybuilding side, and then any other implementations that someone might incorporate in their bodybuilding weight training
Mhm.
for the mental side that we might not see from the outside looking in.
So I would actually argue to say that the logbook is far more incorporating the mental game than it looks like on the outside. So on the surface, yes, the logbook is there to help you have a frame of reference for, hey, what did I do last session? Right. And with the implementation of a logbook, ideally you're standardizing your reps. So ideally from week to week, all of your reps in terms of like your form, your tempo, that's all staying pretty much the same, because it's easy to, you know, one week I'm doing my squats with like a nice slow tempo. And then the next week I throw 10 pounds on each side and then I speed up the tempo and I'm bouncing out of the hole and I can get 2 or 3 more reps. And then I write that in my logbook, but did I truly make the improvement? No, because you didn't standardize it. Another important mental part of the logbook is when you're operating at your highest capacity, especially like if you're in you're in an off season and like everything's clicking, like recovery's on point, your meals are on point, hydration's going great. There's almost this feeling of anxiousness going into every session, because like say you do set a new PR on a machine, like a lifetime PR, you've never hit that number for that many reps before. In the moment, there's this, oh God, like that was great as soon as a set finishes. And then like 3 seconds later, there's, how am I going to beat that next week?
Yeah.
And then so like the dread almost immediately sets in of like, okay, well, if I just did this all-time best hack squat or this all-time best deadlift, now I have to try to find a way to beat it next week. And then I have to try to find a way to beat it the week after that, and the week after that, and the week after that. Now, the thing we know about lifting weights is that it's not perfectly linear progression where you're just making progressions every week. And then so part of the mental side of implementing the logbook effectively is, how do you manage the mental side on weeks where you're not making that progression, either in weight or in reps, etc.? And also, can you pivot away on days when, you know, like, I'm just not feeling as strong as I normally do today? It's like that might be a day where we drop the weight a little bit and then we slow down the tempo and take a progression that way, where you're making the reps harder, but just in a different way to achieve a stimulus. But for a lot of athletes, you look at the weight, you look at the number, and there's this mental game of like, okay, if I don't beat that number, I'm a failure, or this session was a waste of my time. And so for a lot of my athletes that I work with, and also for myself included, I'm not perfect, is when you are using that logbook, can you use it as a tool and not as the end all be all lens through which you are judging your daily performances? And so one thing that I've actually started implementing with myself and then also my athletes is they have the weight that they're using, they have the reps that they're using, but off to the side, I also have them add in 2 more columns, and I have them write in effort and execution in those 2 columns. So for every set that they do, they write in on a scale of 1 to 10, what was your effort on that set and what was your execution like? So it's like, even if I don't take a progression in terms of weight or reps, if I gave 10 out of 10 effort on that set and my execution was as good as it could possibly be, you did the maximum amount of work that you had the capacity for on that day. So you can walk away from the session knowing that I did my best work, even if it didn't result in a new PR.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And actually, so I work with pitchers and I give, I work with some pitchers in the area. And one of the things that I've begun to implement recently is a throwing journal. And I think this is kind of a foreign concept in baseball.
Mhm.
But what I ask them to do is, you have your throwing session, and baseball is obviously a little bit different from the weightlifting side, where you're not going to throw a baseball and then immediately go right down and then pick up the baseball, throw another pitch, So I say after our throwing session is done, I want you to first, what I like to tell them to do is write as much or as little as you want in a paragraph form. And it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, write it down all the thoughts that you have. And especially, you know, a lot of our guys after bullpen, like if they're high intensity, might be a little adrenaline up. They might have 2 pages full of things that are just, half of them might be nonsense. It just is things that they're thinking about. And then I asked them to kind of thought funnel down into, I said, what are 2 things we did great today?
Yeah.
What are 2 things that we can improve on for next week? And then what is one actionable thing that I can implement tomorrow?
Yeah.
And those are the 3 key takeaways, I guess, from the throwing that I've seen help in progression with. Because again, I think the verbiage too with what are 2 things that I can improve on going into next week is better than what are 2 things that I'm bad at. Because also what we get in the habit as pitchers, and I'm sure bodybuilding as well, if you're not good at a certain exercise or it isn't your strong suit, you tend to hang up on that, and it's the only thing you begin to think about. I'm sure it's the same thing with lifting and trying to get, you know, certain exercises to certain weights and certain standards. But, you know, with pitching, it's the same thing. It's like, oh my God, like my arm action this week was terrible and it's been terrible for the last 4 weeks. It's like, make sure our verbiage is what are we doing in order to get better rather than emphasizing what we're bad at, if that makes sense. But that's something I've started to implement as well, and I think is a useful tool.
We want to take a quick second to let you know that today's podcast is brought to you by the Philly Pretzel Factory of Marlton, New Jersey. Whether it's picking up a snack between games or picking up a party tray for the big game, the Philly Pretzel Factory of Marlton has you covered. For all of your pretzel needs, make sure you stop by the Philly Pretzel Factory of Marlton, located on North Maple Ave. Let them know that the ARC podcast sent you. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, and honestly, I love that. I think using that thought journal is like a really, really important tool. And it kind of goes back to obviously making sure we're focusing on the controllables, obviously, right? But it kind of goes back to the thing of like, if I were to say, hey, like, don't think about ice cream.
Right.
The first thing you're going to think about is ice cream, right? Because you're focusing on the thing that you're forcing yourself to not try to focus on. And in the act of trying to force yourself not to focus on it, you end up focusing on it more. But one thing I could see, I don't know if this would be a good or bad tool to use, and maybe like some developer out there could potentially try to use this, is like if there could be like a verbal capture system that pitchers could use.
Yeah.
That would like capture during their throwing sessions. Like, let's say, okay, you make a pitch, right? And then you immediately notice like bad arm action. Like you could just like say a couple of key words where it's just like, oh, like my elbow flared out too much on that pitch.
Right.
And it captures it throughout the entire session of like 50 pitches.
Yeah.
And then afterwards you have the notes from every pitch, and it doesn't actually stop them from doing the thing. It's just, okay, cool. I can just give the verbal note and then get right back to the next pitch.
Right. No, I love that. And, you know, it's funny because when I'm in the facility working with someone, there could be some of those cues that happen just instantly, just like the pitcher looks back and kind of says something. And I'm like, yep, you saw it and you know what to do. You know how to correct it. Great. But one thing, and I'd love to get your opinion on this as well, because I think this also happens in the gym to a certain extent. So I had a pitcher last week and it's like his second week coming. They're progressing into high school baseball, which starts second week of March in New Jersey. So we still got about a month left. And he's throwing like a couple of his first curveballs that he's thrown in the offseason. And he throws this nasty curveball, but it spikes and hits the plate, which again, anyone who knows baseball, it's a good curveball, right?
Yeah.
Where we get into trouble is when the curveball's high. That's when it gets hit. So it hits the plate. And the catcher like goes down to block it. And it just kind of hits him in the chest, like hits the ground, hits him in the chest. And the pitcher says, "I'm sorry." And I was like, wait, hold on. I was like, I don't want to hear again you apologize for throwing a pitch and executing it the way you're supposed to. I was like, also, let's put into context where you are in the offseason. This might have been, let's say, his 10th curveball he's thrown this winter. It's like, and if we're looking at the movement profile of where that was and what that pitch was, especially after a fastball, it was like, you executed the shit out of that pitch and it was nasty. And let's take it for what it is. Let's not apologize, because now what we're telling ourselves in that situation is that is not what I want to throw. When you're in a game, that's the exact pitch that you need to throw. I'd love to hear kind of maybe an example from you that you've kind of seen something similar like that. Because I feel like in the gym, I've also had this, like when I had a lifting partner, me and my buddy Alex would always lift at our local gym. And I feel like we'd get to a certain point on bench, like where once we got to a certain weight, it was almost like, oh, I'm not going to hit this. You know what I mean? Like there's almost that self-talk to a certain extent that you kind of have to jump past, but it's like, I'm not going to be able to lift this up. Like, what do I do? Type of thing.
Yeah. I think the way that I almost view that in terms of like the gym is I know a lot of people are very or can be very rigid in terms of like their exercise selection. I know I've been that way in the past where it's like I have the same movements that I do in the same order every week. And so
Yeah.
some weeks like I'll go into like a machine press and it's just I'm not feeling it in my chest at all. I'm feeling it in my shoulder and I'm feeling it in my triceps, but I'm not getting the actual chest pump that I want to be getting. And so for some people, there's like this rigidity that causes them to not be flexible and say, okay, well, if this movement's not going to work for me, then I can just go do a different type of machine today.
Right.
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 And so I think it's working through like the mental flexibility of, hey, maybe this thing that I'm doing might have missed the mark for what I'm trying to do on this specific task, but
Yeah.
there's other ways to do it. Right. And so as a
Right.
pitching coach, I'm sure you probably fix that by, helping them make the corrections and like, hey, maybe your aiming point needs to be here instead of here, because if you know you can get that much curve on the ball, it's like, we just need to aim a little bit more outside
Right.
now.
Right.
Right. Rather than saying, no, I can't do that pitch, or like, sorry for doing the
Right.
pitch. It's like, hey, the form is right, but the result is not what you might have wanted in this moment. And that's fine. We can
Right.
pivot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No,
I think that I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect in every single task that they do. So it's like for that pitcher, it almost sounds like he's putting a lot of pressure that I've got to throw the perfect pitch every single time. And you and I both know very well, like baseball is a game of failures. Whether it comes to batting or pitching, like you're going to give up hits, you're going to give up runs. As a batter, dude, if you bat 300, you're going to the hall.
right. Right.
And it's like, you're telling me I can fail 7 out of 10 times and I'm going to be a Hall of Famer? It's
Right.
like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And that's
Yeah.
almost a perspective that you need to have.
Right. No, I completely agree. And yeah, I think it is that like trying to be perfect to a certain extent. And I think I'd love to hear too your perspective, like with the gym, because I think with baseball, something that and pitching specifically, sorry for all the pitching references, that's just the
No, you're
world that
good.
I'm kind of in and used to. But what I have also communicated with my pitchers and athletes is have a routine, but don't be subjected to it all the way to an extent where it diminishes you. Like some of
Mhm.
the pitchers that I had come in with me would have an hour long warm up routine before they would even touch a baseball. And at the high school level, I'm sure with
Yep.
football as well, you could go to an away game and you might have 25 minutes to get hot and get ready to go. You cannot implement an hour long warm up routine and then touch a baseball when you don't have the time in order to do that. Where there should be certain things when it comes to your routine and the
Uh,
discipline that utilize, but it needs to be adaptable to a certain extent. You need to
right.
hit these checkpoints maybe and then be able to check it off and go to the next thing. I'd love to hear that with the gym as well, because I'm sure like you said, in that ideology of being perfect and trying to make everything perfect, people could probably be in the gym for 4 hours if they wanted to, or 5 hours. Like you could be there half the day, truthfully.
Mhm.
So I'd love to hear from your perspective, kind of building a routine in that sense, but
Mhm.
not letting it control you and be the thing that tears you down.
Right. And I think it goes back to that same concept I talked about already, the mental flexibility portion, right?
Yeah.
And so one thing that I'll touch on with athletes, like if they feel like if all the conditions need to be perfect, well, then that doesn't mean you're an elite performer, right? Because it's
Right.
like we talk about like elite performers. It's like, Michael Jordan's flu game. Were the conditions perfect for that? No, but he still was able to go out there and perform on that day despite the fact. And part of it is, what are you paying attention to? Like, what is your focus going to? How are you either up regulating or down regulating your physiology? How are you classifying success? What does it actually mean to be ready? Right. Because I think a lot of people, they develop a pre-performance routine and they get into the familiarity of it without actually being able to pinpoint like, hey, what is this routine actually doing for me?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
are there built-in moments where I'm either down regulating or up regulating my physiology? And so kind of going through the concept that, hey, you don't need perfect conditions to perform at a high level. So it's like, let's talk about what an alternative pre-performance routine would look like. What does an abbreviated version of your current routine look like? Like, can you pinpoint what are like the 3 most important things that are going to benefit your performance? And that might be something like, if you're a pitcher, like I need to make sure like my hips are nice and loose, my glutes are firing. I need to make sure my shoulder feels good. And then I need to make sure that like my release point feels good. Like those might be my top 3 things. And it's okay, cool. If you don't have the full hour, you only have 20 minutes. How can we make sure that you're getting those three main priorities?
Right.
That's how I would attack it.
Yeah, no, and I've never heard it phrased like that, so I really appreciate you saying that. High performers don't need the perfect conditions because that's so true. And any environment, like any sport that you play, and I'm sure you can attest to this in high school as a football athlete, and now in bodybuilding, when you show up every game day, like you have this built in your mind, like, oh, it's game day. I'm gonna feel perfect. I'm gonna be whatever. By the end of the season, especially as an offensive lineman, you are beat, you are bruised, you are hurt. Like there's no ifs, ands, or but about it. And the preparation that you put in place in order to get to where you are is why you're going to be able to succeed, right? Because of the process that you put in place. But that doesn't mean that every time that you take the field or every time you take the mound or every time you hit the gym, you're going to feel 100%. That's why I also love you talking about the energy and effort that you put in, or the effort in execution. That's what it was. Effort in
Right.
execution in the gym. Like that's all you can quantify, really, right? Because
Exactly.
you're not going to be able to lift as much as you can every single time you go to the gym. Like you said, progress is not exactly linear. And it's the same thing with pitching too. Like you get into that with the velocity climbs where
Mhm.
velocity is not linear. One bullpen you might throw 90 and the next one you might throw 88, but then the one after that you might throw 91. And it's just that little, climbing just slowly, but again, it's not linear. So I do appreciate that and I like that a lot.
And not only that, but also when you talk about what it takes to become a high performer, right? Just like with anything, with any skill that you're trying to develop, you need to encounter opportunities where the opposite of that skill could take place in order for you to actually build up that skill, right? So when you say, like, hey, I would like to become more patient. Well, you don't become more patient by getting things expediently.
Right.
And so
Right.
when you talk about, okay, well, I want to be a high level performer. Well, you can only test out if you're a high level performer under conditions that are less than ideal. So it's like you get to actually live through the process of becoming a high performer when those conditions are not ideal. Because you get to prove to yourself like, hey, I am resilient. I am able to be flexible. I am able to be dynamic with the decisions that I'm making. So it's like you're not going to play every single game of baseball in, 72-degree weather, sunny, clear skies. It's like, hey, we might have some days that are super humid, right? We might have some days that are really cold. How's that going to affect your pitching? Because all of those moments of adversity, like, hey, if you're a reliever, you might walk in and you're down 2 runs. And it's just like, all right, we got to play some good defense. You might walk in up 2 runs and you got to not blow a save.
Right.
Right. You might get into a jam where they've got two people on and you're up by 1 run. And it's just like, all right, cool. How do I get out of this? And the only way you become a high level performer is through being put in positions that are less than ideal. And then there's going to be times when you fail. That's fine. That's just data. But what ends up happening for a lot of athletes is they use those experiences and they intertwine those experiences of failure into their identity. And then that begets more identification with those failures rather than just saying, hey, yeah, you know what? They put me in. We were up 1 run with 2 runners on. That batter that I faced, I made a poor decision. I threw this type of pitch. I shouldn't have thrown that. That's just data. We lost, but I know I'm not going to do that again in that same situation.
Yeah. Now, I love the ideology of viewing it as just data, right? Like understanding that even if the outcome wasn't where I wanted, you can go back and reflect and be able to correct some of those things that happened after the fact, right?
Yeah.
And I think the key part that you also brought up, which you did it kind of like not intentionally, I guess, but it's not ignoring the problem. It is addressing it. It's not saying that I am a failure because I failed, but it is
Right.
saying I did fail in this scenario and this is why, and this is how we're going to correct it and get better for the next time. Because I think there is also a sense of like that I think gets kind of caught up in the mental performance space sometimes. It's like just be optimistic or be positive, or like if something happens, like just move on and think about the next pitch, where it might not necessarily be that easy, which it never is, right?
No.
Like I'd love to hear your perspective on that thought process as well.
I don't think that's where confidence comes from. And the reason I say that is because when you have the perspective of like, oh, just be positive all the time and be optimistic, I think that loses out on what the root of confidence is, which to me, when I think about confidence, it's not I'm going to be positive or optimistic no matter the outcome. It's no matter the outcome, good or bad or neutral, I will be fine afterwards. And I think that's where that confidence comes from. And a lot of that stems from, can you stay present in the performance without putting unnecessary pressure of the outcome on yourself. So if we're using that same example of a pitcher who they're coming in, right, bottom of the ninth, they've got 2 runners on in scoring position, they got the batter on, you just need to get one out, right? Are you walking up to the mound with the perspective of, I need a specific outcome? Because if you are, all you're doing is you're focused on the future. You don't know what the outcome's going to be until the outcome actually happens. And so if you are thinking about the outcome during the moment of performance, that takes you out of the actual moment of the performance. And that's where some of the miscues start to happen. Because now if your focus and your attention is just on, what the outcome is, that's where you start to lose track of your controllables, which is at that point, it's like, okay, cool. What does my pre-pitch routine look like? Right? What am I feeling internally? And if you're able to focus on those things, then you're focused on the task, you're focused on the process, and then you have the confidence afterwards to say, regardless of what happens, I'm going to be fine. I know there's going to be another game. Maybe it's a doubleheader. Maybe we're playing again tomorrow. Maybe we're playing again next week, right? Or maybe it's a state championship. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm going to be fine either way.
Right. No, I like that perspective a lot. And obviously, the podcast is titled Athletes Resilience Center. And I think when you look at that and what you just described, it's all about being a resilient athlete. And like you said, it's not about going into the situation and in that moment saying, I need a strikeout or I need to beat this lift. I need X, Y, and Z. It's about focusing on the things that you can focus on and control, right? Like you said, what does your pre-pitch routine look like? What can I do right now that gets me to the state that I know I perform my best at? And once you break it down to make it that simple, it really becomes that simple, right? Like some of the best athletes I'm sure that you've worked with or you've seen, they all create simplicities within the game that other people don't have the same, I don't want to say access to because we all do, but they don't have the ability to reach that as simple as some of the other athletes do. And I think it is breaking it down to how can I get to my present form as quickly and as efficiently as possible?
Exactly. And I think when you start trying to control the outcome that you don't have direct control over, you lose sight of the process anyways. And so when you walk into that situation, all you can do is influence the outcome. Like you can only do your half of that pitch, right? The batter gets a say.
Right.
He can choose whether he wants to swing or not, right?
Right.
Maybe he's so immersed in the moment that he's just like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm cool. If I get a hit here, great. If I don't and we lose the game, great. But he's in the moment, right? And if the pitcher's thinking like, hey, I got to strike this guy out right now. It's like all you're focused on is the outcome. You start to lose sight of things like the mechanics. And so that reminds me of there was a baseball player that I worked with when I was going through grad school. It was La Sierra University. It was right over by Cal Baptist University. And he was like, he had the big barrel on the team, right? And so he had put this pressure on himself, like, when I get up there, like, I got to go over the fence. And that messed with his swing mechanics because every time he's in the box, like, he's swinging for the fences. And so I remember he came up to me and he was one of those guys that, like, he didn't really believe in sports psychology. He had, like, a rough upbringing. And so he's just like, whatever, I just keep swinging.
Yeah.
And finally, like, I'd been around long enough. And one day he comes up to me, he goes, man, why am I not hitting no home runs anymore? And I was just like, oh, great. Like, let's talk about it, bro.
Yeah, now let's
And I was
talk.
like, well, are you trying to hit a home run? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, well, that's why.
Yeah,
And I
right.
was like, what is your job? And he's like, my job's to hit home runs. And I'm just like, no. Your job's to get on base first and foremost. It's like, don't swing for the fences every single pitch. And that was something that he thought about. He was like, I have to get this specific outcome, which is then taking my attention away from the task or the process, which is just good swing mechanics. And literally that next game, because they were playing a doubleheader that day, that next game, he went like 2 for 3. And I was just like, I looked at him after the second time he got on base, he got onto first base, and I just looked at him and I just kind of gave him like one of these, like a shrug, and he just like pointed at me. He was just like, and I was like, exactly.
I do think that's everything right there, right? That's like exactly in any sport. I feel like everyone's so outcome driven, outcome focused, where once we can dial it back and understand what the process looks like and how we can get that process every single time that we take the mound, get in the box and just kind of stay present, that's where we're going to thrive and do our best. And I'd love to see, because you brought up and we talked about your connection to working in performance with the military, correct? So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from your perspective kind of some of the similarities and differences that you see in the military and then with the athletes that you've worked with, because I think we've had a lot of people on here who have had a background in performance psychology and have worked with people in the military who have a military background, and then they
Yeah.
go into sport. And there are a lot of interesting comparisons, and I'd love to hear from your perspective kind of what you've seen when it comes to similarities and differences between the two.
Yeah. So some similarities, especially working with team sport athletes and pilots in the military. Um, the sense of community and camaraderie is a big one, right? I've noticed that like the squadrons that I've worked with and the classes of pilots that have come through, because I get a new class of pilots every 3 weeks.
Okay.
It's like the classes that have the best sense of community and who are like trying to go above and beyond to help each other out, like everyone just performs better, right? Because it goes back to like the old saying, like a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I think a lot of times when people view performance in a community aspect, they think about, hey, we need to raise the ceiling together. But I think you get the most bang for your buck when you can raise the floor together.
Yeah.
And
Right.
raising the floor starts with setting standards for the entire community. So it's like, hey, if we have a class of students or if we have a team of baseball players, like what does our minimum standard day look like? Like what are the non-negotiable things that we need to do together as a team? So like as a baseball team, it might be we're getting a team lift in, right? We might be getting, we're eating food together on our breaks, like we're whatever. For the pilots, it might be, hey, we're doing like a 30-minute study session every day, and we're trying to
Okay.
figure out, okay, what's everyone's weak points.
Yeah.
So a big similarity is that sense of community and camaraderie. Another similarity is usually a deep sense of purpose. Now, the type of purpose is usually very different. So it's like I've worked with pilots who their sense of purpose for wanting to become a pilot was, hey, like my grandpa was a pilot back in World War II. My dad was a pilot in Vietnam, and right. And so it's like, I want to carry on the family legacy. For some others, it might be like, oh, I went to my first air show when I was 6 years old and I fell in love with aviation right then and there. And I remember, when I was in Columbus, I was working with a student and I asked him, because at the point we had an academic one-on-one with every single student that was coming through the pipeline. And I would always finish the session with like, hey, what's your why for wanting to come to pilot training? And he straight up just said, I just want to get a good pension and be able to retire early. And so understanding like, hey, what's the purpose that drives you? And then for some of them, it's like, hey, I want to defend my country. I want to serve my country. Now, for athletes, a lot of times, like most athletes aren't thinking about serving their country when it comes to their sense of purpose. Like unless your entire goal is like to make it to the Olympic team, then obviously that's a little different. But for most athletes, that's not the main goal. But for a lot of them, it's, hey, like, yeah, my dad was a two-sport athlete. Like my mom played D1 this. And so it's like the same kind of thing where it's like carrying on the family legacy. And so the sense of purpose also is a major similarity. Now, the difference is obviously the glaring one is that with pilots and fighter pilots, like this is life or death. Right. And so it's like, especially when I'm working with fighter pilots and they're learning defense tactics, it's like, hey, how do I outrun a bogey? How do I make certain maneuvers to make sure that the guy who's behind me can never get a clean shot? And so I noticed that I don't want to call it like my intensity, but I understand the stakes are higher when I'm working with fighter pilots versus when I'm working with a bodybuilder who's like, oh, like I don't really like the way I look today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Right.
that's the stakes are different. That's where the
Way
main thing
different.
is, because it's like when I'm working with pilots, it's, hey, I'm trying to give you these mental skills so you can come back home safely after your deployment. Versus with athletes, it's like, hey, I want you to perform at a high level so you can enjoy your process. And I would say that's where the main differences tend to lie.
Now, I'd love to hear, this will be my last question before we jump into our last segment, but
Mhm.
I'd love to hear from your perspective as a coach now. I obviously asked
Mhm.
you what the differences that you see with, working with pilots in this sense and working with athletes. Now, from your coaching lens, right? Because obviously, like you said, this is your job working with the military, and then you also have your business working with athletes. Now, how do you, as the mental performance coach, switch from, hey, I'm the mental performance coach for these fighter pilots.
Mhm.
Now I am a mental performance coach for athletes? Because I feel like for you, you probably have to lock in different ways as well. And you probably have to, interact in much different ways as well. So I'd love to hear that from your perspective.
Well, I think the fact that there's so much separation in my day between the two helps quite a bit. And
Yeah.
so I normally I work like normal 7:30 to 3:30 when I'm at my military contracting job. And so it's like from those hours, like I am the pilot mental performance coach, right? And then immediately after I get off work there, I usually go train. And so
Okay.
it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I've had like this time in my day where I'm pilot mental performance coach, and then I'm bodybuilder Gabriel for 2 hours
Yeah.
when I go to the gym.
Right.
And then so I think allowing myself to be the athlete and recognizing that like, hey, the work I was doing earlier today, like that was much higher stakes than me bodybuilding, and then creating that separation and then going into client calls later on in the evening. I think I just carry the mindset of like, hey, okay, I've been in that athlete headspace for the last 2 hours before I even work with any of my athletes later that evening. So I think that the separation itself helps quite a bit. And I also think that just kind of reminding myself like, hey, this standard to which we're trying to teach these skills to bodybuilding athletes, it's not life or death. And if
Yeah.
and if there is something that's life or death, like I'm not the person you should be calling. Like you should
Right.
be working with like a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist or more extreme measures. So I think it's also about having grace. Where it's like if I'm working with a pilot and we're talking about, like emergency procedures, your emergency checklist because this an engine just went out. Like, hey, you've got a few seconds to try to figure this out before you've got to
Yeah.
pull that ejection seat.
Right.
With bodybuilders, it's okay. We can be a lot more. We can be a lot slower and more deliberate about the process of like thinking through like a bad body dysmorphia day or a bad training session. Like you're allowed to take 3 to 5 minutes to go walk to the other side of the gym, collect yourself, take some deep breaths, get back in the right mindset, and then come back to your next set.
Right. Now, it's very cool to kind of see the two differences. And then from
Mhm.
your perspective, like, I do like that idea of you being able to go to the gym and now you're bodybuilding Gabriel, and then you get to
Mhm.
work with bodybuilders. And it's something that I've actually kind of implemented with my coaching with pitchers, where
Yeah.
I try to get there a little bit early and it just to get the feel and the sense and like, okay, like I'm in this baseball mode. I feel good. I'll just grab my old glove that I have and
Mm.
literally just like throw a baseball. And again, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to do anything crazy, but just like get
Yeah.
in the vibe of like, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to go. And like I'm in this atmosphere again that kind of like lifts your spirits up a little bit. So
Yeah.
I've definitely tried to implement that a little bit. It's almost like getting in the mindset of, all right, I'm ready to coach and help these athletes.
Yeah, and that's something that I touch on as well with a lot of like my clients. When you start talking about roles versus identity, right? So your identity is much more rooted in like, what are your values, right? Like, how do you see yourself versus the roles are kind of like, okay, what are the different hats that I wear throughout the day? So for you, like, you're a father, right?
Right.
Are you married?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you wear many different hats. You're your father, your husband, you're someone's son. I mean, if you have any siblings, you're
Right.
someone's brother.
Yep.
Right. And so you're wearing all these different hats, and those hats, you have specific traits that are going to make you successful at wearing those specific hats. So the traits that allow you to show up as the best version of yourself as a husband might not allow you to show up as the best version of you as a mental performance coach, or the same thing as a dad. Now, some of those traits are going to carry over, like being present with your wife, being present with your baby, right? That's going to allow you to perform better when you're working with your pitchers. But like the level of intensity that you show up with your pitchers, probably not going to be super conducive to like if you
Right.
bring that home with you, right?
Right. Right.
And so that's where, having that separation, and like you said, like part of your pre-performance routine to get in the mindset of being a good mental performance coach for pitchers is, you know what, like there's this mental cue that I have for myself, putting on the glove, throwing the ball, and that's the trigger for my brain to say, hey, we're in mental performance coach mode now. We're
Right.
no longer dad right now. We're no longer
Yep.
husband right now.
Yeah. No, it's really helped and it's been cool to kind of implement. But no,
Mhm.
I love that. And we talk about identity a ton on here, and I kind of love the, I guess, usage of like everyone wears different hats, but your identity is rooted in much deeper. Us as athletes and bodybuilders and everything in between, like when we're not performing, we attach that to what our identity is, and we have like
Mhm.
that identity crisis. So I know I said that I was gonna have one more question, but this will be the last question before the
Let's
fast
do
five.
it. Let's
So
do it.
the identity aspect, because you brought it up, right? Like, how do you help bodybuilders who might not have a great training session and then their whole identity almost seems shattered because they've attached so much value into becoming the best bodybuilder that they possibly can, rather than understanding that your identity is rooted in your values, in what you believe in, not the performance that you put out in the gym or on stage or whatever it might be.
One of the quotes that sticks out to me a lot, and it's one that I use with a lot of my athletes, is people love you for who you are, not for what you do. And I think that a lot of times people think that their value is rooted and predicated in outcomes and performances that they are able to achieve or achievements themselves. And so when you believe that your value as a human is rooted in achievement and outcome and performance, anytime that you don't perform to the level that you want to, it almost feels like threat rather than opportunity, right? And so when you view that as threat, your defenses come up. And the way that your ego deals with that is to get frustrated. And it's this negative feedback loop where you perform poorly. And so you get frustrated, which also means you end up performing more poorly, which means you get more frustrated. When the logical response is, hey, I can have a bad performance and still feel like I'm valuable, right? And the logical framework for that is you are not your performance. And also, you're allowed to have a bad training session. I think a lot of times they view it as a zero-sum game where if I don't progress across all of my lifts today, well, that means someone else just got better than me. And that means that I'm never going to be able to catch them, or I'm never going to reach my full potential because I'm not hitting every single session perfectly. And we know that that's not true, because what we do know is that consistency over a long period of time is going to get you far greater results than intensity in spurts.
No, yeah, I love that. I talk with athletes about that all the time, that it's not a short-term game. Everything that you're talking about, everything that you do as an athlete is a long-term game, whether you like it or not. Whether this is your senior season and you're done after this year, right? The things that you were able to prove to yourself as a football athlete, as a senior, have carried over into everything that you've accomplished and done since that point, right? It's the long-term game. It's what we're trying to accomplish and achieve for the rest of our lives, not what we're trying to accomplish and achieve for this specific season, to get a
Exactly.
trophy, to get the all conference recognition, to get whatever it is, right? It's all of the skills that you acquire throughout the process of trying to get to those achievements that you want. But again, it's not based on that outcome or that result. It's based on what you go through and the process that you put into place. So no, I completely agree. And I love that perspective of, shifting that mindset of what your identity actually stands for and rooting that in your values and your mission, and understanding, you're much bigger than the sport that you play. So I
Yeah.
do appreciate you sharing that. That's great. But we can jump right into our Fast Five segment, because this is perfect. The first question is actually tied to what we just talked about. Like we talked about before we got on the podcast, Fast Five segment, 5 semi-rapid fire questions about mental performance in sports. So I'll fire them off if you're ready.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So first one, what part of your identity did sports help you discover?
I want to say resilience. Yeah, I'm going to say resilience because I think that I was never naturally gifted at things, but I was very stubborn about being competitive. And so there was this part of me that hated losing so much that it made me stubborn to be better at whatever the thing was that I valued at the time. So when I was younger, it was beating my brother in basketball. And I didn't think I beat him until I was like 12 years old or 13 years old. And like I said, he's 6 years older than me, right? But it's because I was stubborn enough to keep practicing. And the
Right.
same thing holds true for every sport endeavor that I've gotten better at over the years. Cause I started playing football. I was on the bench my entire freshman year.
Yeah.
Right. And I was barely playing my sophomore year. I actually got pulled my sophomore year. Junior year, I came in, I was like fighting for a starting position every game. And then senior year was finally when it all clicked. And like that took
Yeah.
4 years of process before I was finally just like, and then by the time I got what I considered to be good or kind of maxed out what I thought my capabilities were, I was like, okay, it's over. Now it's time to go move on to the next thing.
Right.
So
Right.
that's what I would say. That stubbornness and the resilience.
I love that. Question 2, looking back, what moment felt like the end for you, but ended up being a new beginning?
Tearing my labrum in my shoulder.
Mm,
So that happened in early 2021.
okay.
I had done my first bodybuilding show in 2019. And then obviously 2020, all the gyms in California kind of shut down. And so I had lost my sense of discipline because I wasn't really able to go to the gym much. And I was just like, well, I'm not going to do like at home workouts. Like, that's dumb. So I kind of lost my discipline for a while there. And then I had started dieting again towards the end of 2020. I'd started losing weight. And then I was playing basketball with some friends, took a bad fall for my labrum in my left shoulder, had to get surgery, and that kind of felt like the end. But what that ended up doing is it ended up setting me up to be a lot smarter about my training, because I can definitely recall the difference of what my training looked like back then and how much less precise and accurate the training was, which was putting me in compromised positions that I didn't recognize at the moment. Because it's like you're 20, what, at that point I think I was like 24 years old. It's like my
Yeah.
body's super resilient, like my shoulder's still
Right.
fine. But
Right.
it took me getting injured and feeling like, oh, bodybuilding is over, for me to recognize that, like, oh no, you can still do bodybuilding, but you just have to be a lot smarter about the approach.
Yeah. Now, that goes back to, again, your point about failure, where it's like we can look at it in two different ways. You can look at it as this is who I am and I failed and I'm done, or how can we learn from this? And it seems like you've learned from that. So that's awesome. I appreciate that. Question 3: when everything around you is chaotic, what is one mental habit that brings you back to center?
Coffee on the porch or on my
Mm,
balcony.
I love that.
That's zen for me.
Yeah.
I don't do it as often as I should, but every weekend, if me and my girlfriend don't have some sort of scheduled plans like real early, you're gonna find me on that back patio,
I love that.
sipping a cup of coffee. That, and then also the drive to the gym. The drive to the gym is a really important one as well. So things could be chaotic at work, at home, whatever. As long as I have that like 15 to 20-minute drive to the gym, I've got my pre-workout and I've got a good playlist, like I'm totally fine.
I love that. That was the first time someone said the coffee on the porch. I really like that. I vibe
Mhm.
with that heavy. Number 4: what belief about yourself did you have to unlearn in order to grow as an athlete or a person?
I think I'm still in the process of unlearning it right now. I used to have this belief that I'm not as creative as I think that I can be.
Okay.
And so the reason why I say that, especially like having started up my business back last year, part of the reason why I never started the business in the many years before that I wanted to, is because I was like, well, I don't have all the tools necessary to do so. Like, I don't know how to do marketing. I don't know how to
Right.
do business deals. I don't know how to talk to clients, and I don't know how to do content. And that's something that I'm still in the process of figuring out right now. And so I see other people within the mental performance space that do really, really good content, kind of like when I swiped up on your story, right? I swiped up on your story because I was like, oh, like I want to be able to formulate my words and put them out to people in a similar vein that you guys do. Or like whether you're creating posts, I don't know if you follow him, Sip Drake,
Yes.
Drake
Yes.
Davis.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like he's honestly like my favorite content creator right
I
now in
l-
the mental
I
performance
love his
space.
stuff, dude. Me
The way
too.
that
I
he
love
just
him.
like flows,
Yeah.
I find myself watching his videos and I'm just like, I wouldn't have seen that connection.
Me too. Me too.
And
Yeah.
so I think that I'm in the process of unlearning the fact that I had this belief that I'm not creative enough to create stuff like that. And so I'm in the process of like, okay, you can do it. You just need to spend some time with it.
Yeah, no, you bring up Sip Drake, he's awesome. I love him on
Yeah.
social media, he's awesome. But I think that's something too that I have fought with for a while, because it was the same thing. My co-host jokes with me all the time. He proposed starting a podcast back in like 2019, the first year after we
Mhm.
graduated college. And I was just kind of like, I don't know what kind of content we would be able to
Mhm.
make. Like, there's a lot of that self-doubt of you don't have
Right.
the creativity or the skills in order to do it. So I appreciate that vulnerability of you talking about that, because I think that's something a lot of people face before getting
Mhm.
into whatever they're actually passionate about and want to do. So no, I completely agree.
Yeah. And I started to recognize as well that part of it was just like I didn't want to be seen as like the fool or like cringy. Like I don't want to
Right.
make content where people are like, no, that's wrong. Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't want to be seen as the guy that's just like, oh, you can tell like he just started doing this. And then
Right, right,
finally everything just clicked and I was like, you know what? No, like I need to do this.
right,
And
right.
then that's when like the veil kind of like came off, and I was just like, I'm just gonna full send it. And if people don't like it, like they just won't like it, like physically like the content. And if they don't, like that's fine. Like I'm done making it for what other people want it to be and more so for what I think brings value.
Right. And once you jump in, you find out that it's not as scary as you thought it was going to be.
Exactly.
So I love that. And then last one, number 5. What does success feel like to you now? And how has that changed since you were a high school athlete?
Man, that's tough to answer because there's a part of me that never feels like I've actually been successful, despite the fact that like objectively I have.
Right.
Like I've
Right.
created a life that I love. I get to do
Yeah.
what I love on a daily basis. I get to bodybuild. Life looks like what I want life to look like. But in terms of like whether it's like financial success or having a certain number of clients or anything like that, it always feels like it's not success because it felt like an obligation that was like supposed to happen or that I was supposed to make happen. So it almost feels like the things that I'm doing feel like the bare minimum. It's like, and I
Right.
don't ever really reward myself, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. No,
And
I
like an
completely get
example
that.
I can use for bodybuilding is like, oh, if I win a show someday, my thought process as I think of that thought is like, well, I should win a show if I'm going to put 10 years into this, right? Rather than like, oh yeah, like that was a really good journey. And so I think I still grapple with the thought of feeling successful because
Yeah.
I always feel like there's more to do, which
Yeah.
part of it goes back to what we talked about earlier about having like an outcome focus rather than leaning into the process and taking more time to step back and recognize what I just told you, which was I built a life that I wanted it
Right.
to look like. And I think
Right.
that is success in and of itself.
No, definitely. I completely agree with that. I think when you were saying that, I was like, that's just the perfect definition of what success looks like, right? Like you have built a life the way that you want it to look like right now. And I think that's awesome. It's great. That's
But I think we don't recognize it because we always move the goalposts. So it's like as you
of
achieve a
course.
goal, if you don't actually take time to sit with it and let it marinate and chew on it, all you do is just move the goalposts further and further away. And that's something that I need to get better at for sure in terms of, I don't feel like I know what success feels like, even though I have gotten a small taste here and there.
Right.
Oh, I don't know.
No,
That's how I see it at least.
no, I completely agree. And I've talked to many athletes about that too. It is like take a second and take it all in a little bit. Like
Mhm.
if you again, you're not resting on your laurels or anything like that. You know, that's the old school thought process of like once you taste success, like don't start sipping the champagne and celebrating, right?
Yep.
But there is a piece of you that should have gratitude for some of the things that are happening
Mhm.
for you. So no, I love that you shared that. That's awesome. I appreciate that because I feel like a lot of people have a similar mindset on that. I definitely share that belief as well.
Yep.
But Gabriel, I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast, share your story, share what you're up to, share all the things mental performance in bodybuilding, in working with the military on how it all blends, how you utilize it as a bodybuilder yourself. Like, I really appreciate your unique perspective. Like I said before, I love your content on social media. I'd love you to
Thank you.
drop your social media stuff on here, all your handles and everything, so everyone can go follow you. But I really do appreciate you coming on here and sharing some valuable content with our viewers because it really was, super beneficial for everyone.
Thank you, man. Like I said before, I'm really honored that you guys were willing to have me on. I know we haven't really talked much before this
Right.
conversation. Like we just
Yeah.
had the one social media interaction. So just to kind of put that blind faith and be like, yeah, you know what? I am going to spend an hour and a half with this guy and hopefully it's not going to be awkward or
Yeah.
dull or anything like
Right.
that. So I appreciate you guys allowing me to use your platform to hopefully provide some value for someone out there who hears this episode.
Of course. No, it definitely did. And I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing all that, man. It was awesome. It was a great episode.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, everyone, I'll see you next week. Thanks.